Oh, 7 and 8?
Yeah, you said you had one more.
Yeah, we got one more. I've always got one more page of notes.
Thank you.
All right.
I think we're on page 4E. We read it, I think, quickly.
Okay, yeah, let's start there, just kind of review that, and then we will go into the campaign of Armageddon. I will encourage you as we go through the campaign of Armageddon. There is so much material that deals with the campaign of Armageddon. Much of it out of the Old Testament. That word it's just not feasible to read all those passages on every stage. So let me encourage you to read the passages that are in your notes that we don't go over, the ones that are mentioned. A lot in, there's passages in Zechariah and Jeremiah and Isaiah. Because one of the sad things to me about many of our evangelical churches is, yes, we should spend a lot of time in the New Testament. That's true. Because that is, especially the epistles, are instruction to the church. And we're in the church age. That's stuff written pretty much, well, it's written directly to the church. I know it wasn't written directly to Prairie Valley Baptist Church. But all of those church truths are in there, and that's important. But the sad part is, as we approach the end of time, to understand those last 7 years, what's going to go on there and why it's going to go on there, you absolutely have to understand the Old Testament. And when you understand the Old Testament, you understand that there's a lot of stuff that's prophesied and promised in the Old Testament that has not come true yet, or has not been fulfilled yet. And agreements that God made with the nation of Israel that He has not fulfilled yet ultimately, because it depends on their repentance and turning to Him as a nation, which is the reason why there is a nation today. One of the greatest signs that all of that stuff will eventually will come to pass, and it will come to pass in Israel, and specific things will happen in Jerusalem, is because promises were made that would occur, and it's not occurred yet. That's why for about 1900 years, there was no national entity with which all of these prophecies could be fulfilled. Isn't that astounding?
Yes.
And that is why for hundreds of years, the position on the future was more reading that this must be spiritual fulfilled in the church, and all this type of thing, because obviously people looking at the scene during the 1700s, 1800s, half of the 1900s, they're looking on the scene and they're saying, there's no way this can be fulfilled literally with Israel. We must be Israel, because Israel doesn't exist.
That's right.
I mean, how do you sign a covenant between the Antichrist and a national entity called Israel if Israel does not exist? That's why you never, ever interpret prophetic events based on what's going on right now. That's why when I put up things like I did this week on Facebook, I point out this is stage setting. We know that someday, we've already looked at this, we know that someday the Antichrist will have the ability to control commerce and trade totally, absolutely. And we see things, even the Biden administration taking steps. If you saw the article I put up, they are working with the World Health Organization to sign an agreement so that anything like COVID happen again, we lose our national sovereignty in that area. The World Health Organization would say what gets shut down, what mandates, what kind of vaccines could have. So that is a stage-setting event. When you're yielding your national sovereignty to a international organization like that, multinational international organization, that's stage-setting, because we know ultimately there'll be a system where they can control that. So is that fulfillment? No. Fulfillment is when it says this is exactly what's going to happen. Fulfillment will be when they pull out the chips, or however they're going to do the number 666, and that starts happening. That's fulfillment. But again, if they're going to do that, we're going to see a progression of stage setting where it's going to be. We're already. Most of you have studied prophecy in your life, and some of it, even when I was a kid, it almost seemed like out there a long ways. How could that ever happen? I grew up in a day where the United States was extremely strong. When I really started paying attention to politics, Ronald Reagan was president. I remember Carter. I remember the sad days of President Carter. But I also remember the days of Ronald Reagan and the strength of our country. And you're thinking, that must be a long way off when all of that could happen. Well, it doesn't look so long away, no long down the road, does it, anymore? Because of the stage-setting events that we have seen. Now, it could still be years down the road. I'm of the opinion that we're not looking at 100 years. I think we're looking at much shorter than that. I believe the U.S., unless there's a major spiritual revival, which I don't believe personally will happen, even though God can do what He wants. He's not listening to me and saying, "Oh, Rusty said, it's probably not going to happen. I'm not going to do it." No, if He wants to do it, He can certainly do it. But barring that, if you look at all the statistics of what people believe, I'm looking at the church, because the church is the pillar and the support of truth. The church is salt and light. It is because of the strength of the church that the United States has lasted as long as it has. And the spiritual truths written into our founding documents. Now, when the church gets weak, that's when you have to be worried. There is no salt and light, preservation and casting of truth over our nation anymore. And we're there, folks. Barna says 6% of evangelicals believe in 7 fundamentals of the faith. 6%? You can listen to how many people claim to be Christians and how many people visit the church at least one time each month and all this kind of stuff, and still claim we're a Christian nation in the sense of lots of Christians. But when you have only 7% understanding some of the things, these are doctrinal things that at the turn of the last century, when liberalism was sweeping over from Europe and coming into the United States and starting to influence, these are the doctrines, many of these that he did his survey on. These are the doctrines that Baptists, Presbyterians, Methodists, Lutherans, all of Protestant and evangelical churches, well, they weren't really called evangelical back then, because evangelicalism was a term that developed after that. But what I'm saying is all of these major churches came together and they said, we can't agree on all these other things, maybe even prophetic events in the beginning, but we can agree in the virgin birth and the deity of Christ and the deity of the Spirit of God and the Trinity and all of these things that everybody agrees on. We're going to agree on that, and we're going to fight for the church. And so you had these conferences all over the United States and in Europe that fought off liberalism, educated the church, and preserve the church for a little bit longer. The church is in a horrible situation right now. When you have the son of one of the greats of evangelicalism that just went to heaven, when you have his son compromising on so many fundamental issues, man, we're in trouble. And you have all of the people that we would list that are some of the greatest preachers of our time. Almost every one of those guys are in their 80s.
Yep.
What are we going to get? Maybe 10 more years from them? Some less than that, probably. Maybe a few more years God will grant them. Church is in trouble. And so we find ourselves in a situation where, again, unless a massive spiritual awakening happened in the United States, it does not look good for the future of the church in the United States. I heard a pastor talking this last week about the situation of the church and stuff, and he said that what did he call it? That comfortable middle that's always existed in evangelicalism. You know, you kind of believe and you kind of go to church some. That's evaporating now, and there's a polarization because you have these critical issues like what's a woman, what's a man, you know, homosexuality and transgenderism and all of this stuff that's polarizing us. Because you either buy into their illusion or you're canceled or marginalized. So some of the same marginalization type forces that occurred, that resulted in the Holocaust are in place now in the United States. And it's going to be us and the Jews that are the ones that are separated, because Satan knows those who know the truth, they don't, you know, we need to demonize them just like they did the Jews in World War II. And actually some of the same philosophical forces that cause that are going on right now in the United States. So we're getting closer. We're seeing stage setting. We're not seeing fulfilling yet. But Israel is there. They're a national entity. There can be a treaty done with them that would start it all. But I think, you know, I think it could be 5 years, 10 years, could be up to 50. I don't know. But could be less too. We could get raptured out of here before we ever leave, and that would just be wonderful, wouldn't it? That would just be awesome.
What was our pastor that sang at the Baptist men? Well, we got to go see to the Baptist men's choir, and we got to talk to our pastor. He was probably our before we joined this church, probably our pastor for about 20-25 years, and he come up to me and he says 10 to 15 years is what I'm going to give it.
Yeah.
And he was as serious as he could be.
Yeah. Well, you can see exponentially the decline is more and more rapid, faster and faster and faster.
It is. Exactly.
And that's because there's no foundation left.
Right.
It's like a building it's still tottering there, but there's nothing underneath it. It's Jesus' illustration of the house built on the sand.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's only a matter of time. All right. So just to review the fifth bowl, this is on page 4. It says, then the fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast. So remember, this is getting more and more concentrated on his kingdom, and now it's directly on his throne of power. And his kingdom became darkened, and they gnawed their tongues because of pain. And they blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and they did not repent of their deeds. That's the human heart. It gets, once it turns from God, it gets, for a believer, the harder things get. If they're really a believer, the harder things get, the more purified they get, the more mature they get. For an unbeliever, it's the opposite. Everything gets blamed on God, even though they don't believe in God. You know, I don't think at this point, I don't think there are going to be any true atheists left. Just God haters. That's what's going to be left. It says the fifth bowl is poured out directly on the throne of the beast. Dr. Thomas writes, the destination of this bowl is the throne of the beast. The same spot, that should say same, the same spot where his power and presence reside, or the seat of his rule. I believe that's Babylon, but we'll talk about that. His rule, authority, and dominion. The earliest mention of the throne is in 13:2, which notes the dragon's gift of that throne to the beast. Remember, the throne, generally, the word throne is used figuratively in the sense of, we're not talking about a literal chair. We're talking about, when you talk about the throne, you're talking about their authority to rule. Remember, in the Davidic covenant, David was promised a throne forever. Now, that's not the same, literal throne, but his authority to rule will be carried out by his Son, Jesus Christ, eternally. So, the earliest mention of the throne is in 13:2, like it says. Remember, the dragon is Satan. So long untouched, that throne through which the dragon has perverted all of human society into a demonic civilization is now the focal point of God's anger. The beast will be just as helpless against the plague as Pharaoh was against the comparable 9th plague against Egypt. So we remember that. His kingdom became dark, a darkening like previous judgments, but more extensive. Remember, now it's all over, it's worldwide. As a result of the judgment, the people of this kingdom experience an agonizing and excruciating pain, so that they gnawed their tongues because of pain, and they blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and they did not repent of their deeds. This shows the depths of rebellion found in the human heart. The response is to curse God instead of repenting and turning to God. Just unbelievable how evil the human heart is. Even knowing that should make us grateful for God's grace on us. Because although our heart may not have ever gotten as hard as these hearts, every human heart has the potential for that. That's what we call depravity. So when we get to this point, we get to the point of where we're going to talk about the different stages of the campaign of Armageddon. And I think, let's see if I can make this work. Probably ought to turn it on. All right. We talked about this before. One of the challenges of figuring this all out is to figure out the passages in Jeremiah, and the passages in Isaiah, and the passages in Zechariah, all that by context you can tell are talking about the end. For instance, just as a for instance, there are a lot of passages in the Old Testament that talk about Babylon being destroyed and never being inhabited again. Well, that's never happened. If you remember, during the first Gulf War, Starman, what was his name? Norman Schwarzkopf. During that, the king, what was his name? Saddam Hussein. He was rebuilding Babylon.
Right.
There were people living there, and I believe there are still people living there now, in that village right there. So you have all these prophecies, and even though, well, think about this. If you remember the book of Daniel, you remember that that when the Medo-Persians overcame the Babylonians, do you remember how that happened? How they fell? You know, there's a battle going on.
They diverted the water and went in under the gate and took them without ever firing a shot.
No destruction there.
Yeah.
See, there's these passages in the Old Testament where there's no fulfillment. Historically, we've never seen them fulfilled. Okay? I'll stay over here.
Oh,
This is not good for recording when I stand over there and
Well,
talk.
I did.
Okay,
I said, I guess
so-
it was already
No,
running.
you're ready, but you wouldn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So let's talk about the location.
Okay.
Let's talk about the location. Now, I want to encourage you to read the notes later and all the notes. But we're going to walk through this and think through it together. So let's talk about, because we always hear about the Battle of Armageddon. I grew up hearing about the Battle of Armageddon. It's the ultimate battle and that type of thing. So we want to clarify some things here. First, it is called Armageddon in Revelation 16:16. Are all of your translations say Armageddon? Because some do translate it just a little differently. So most of them translate the Greek there, Armageddon. Okay, so in Joel 3, verses 2 and 13, they speak of events taking place in the valley of Jehoshaphat. And that's the same area, just east of Jerusalem. And we're going to look at a map here in just a minute, where you visually will see where this is at. Isaiah 34 and Isaiah 63 picture the Lord coming from Edom. Remember, that's east of the Dead Sea, right? Some of you have been to Edom, haven't you? Some of you? We've got some people in the church that have been to Edom. And that's where Petra is. Didn't you go to Petra, Sharon?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the red
Yeah.
sandstone cliffs and all that type of stuff. Okay, remember where Edom comes from? Esau. The descendants of Esau who lived, it's east of the Dead Sea and a little bit north, that area. And they weren't very nice to Israel later, remember? And so we even have a prophet that is prophesying against Edom. So, which is south of Jerusalem, returning from judgment. So this is what we're talking about. Okay, we have Revelation 16 talking about this going on in Armageddon. Joel talks about some end time events happening in the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is east of Jerusalem, because Armageddon, the valley of Armageddon, is west, northwest, okay? But some events also happen in the valley of Jehoshaphat. You also see events occurring in the area of Edom, again, which is east, southeast of Jerusalem. And then you also have the passages in Zechariah where it's talking about some of this conflict actually occurring in and around Jerusalem. And then in Revelation 14:20, you remember we've read this. It talks about the blood up to the bridles for so many furlongs.
200 miles.
It's a long way, folks. You know how small Israel is? The only way you can come up with that, and we'll talk about that just a little bit, is apparently the battle has to happen over a distance and then has to come back some. It's the only way you can figure that length of time. I mean, that length of mileage, if you will, kilometers over there. So, We have to answer that question. Where's it going to happen? Also, we have to ask the question, who's going to be involved in it? Because the Bible talks about the revived Roman Empire, right? We've looked at that in Daniel. And by the middle of the tribulation period, some of those nations kind of rebelled against the Antichrist. I believe we've talked about this too. And he overcomes 3 of those nations. So it's down to 7. But also, a part of this, in a part of this battle, it talks about the kings of the east, which would be different, right? Remember, Rome from Jerusalem would be west, maybe northwest. But the kings of the east is always in the Bible, when it talks about east of Israel, it's always talking about Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
So where Iraq, Iran, that area is, the Fertile Crescent. It also talks about in Jeremiah 50, a horde of great nations from the land of the north, when it's talking about who destroys Babylon. I can actually print all of this off for y'all at some point. Thankfully, you can just click a button and print a PowerPoint presentation. And then it also, remember, at the end, somebody appears from heaven. And that's the Lord, the second coming. And us with him. So, with his armies from heaven, it says in Revelation 19. So again, how does all this fit together? And so let's talk about the events so far up to this point that we've talked about. So you have 3 nations in the 10-nation confederacy, which was the revived Roman Empire, had rebelled against the beast. And you read about that in Daniel 11. I don't know if you want to write that down. Daniel 11, 36 through 45. And then the beast and his forces had put down that rebellion. Then the beast had broken the 7-year covenant with Israel. Remember? That's midpoint. The covenant's broken. Stopped their worship of Yahweh and set up an image of himself in the temple for them to worship. In fact, somehow that false prophet is able to, I don't know if this is AI, with I don't know if y'all have heard all this stuff going on with AI right now. Google has an AI and it figured out how to speak a language, and they really don't understand how it figured that out. Sounds like some of the sci-fi movies, doesn't it? Sounds like that one, what was that? 2001 or something, was that one years ago? I'm sorry? Al, he started taking over the ship, killing all the people. That was way before your time, Cody. Way, you'll have to look in the archives to find that. We thought that was cutting edge sci-fi back then. The beast is now the world dictator, ruling from Babylon and promoted by the false prophet and the dragon. So we're trying to hit the high points and catch up here. All right, so we get to stage 1. This is where Armageddon is mentioned. This is Revelation 16, right? 16:16. Armageddon. So what we see from this, with all these different locations and all of these different people mentioned being involved in this final battle, this has to be a campaign, not a single battle. And so you have to, it's like having a piece of puzzle, a puzzle, and you have to the pieces, and you've got to figure out how all this fits together. So we read here that the location of Armageddon is mentioned. We also read that this is actually what the Bible doesn't call this a battle of Armageddon. it mentions it's one of the locations is Armageddon here, but it calls it the war of the great day of God the Almighty. That's the final series of conflicts. That's the best name for it. And why don't somebody turn to Psalm 2? And I encourage you to read these verses that are up here. Those are in your notes, so you can go back and look at those. So this is a psalm all of us have read, probably many times. And this is a prophetic psalm. You know, those psalms are full of prophecy.
Which psalm was it?
Psalm 2.
2.
Okay, I want you to listen very closely to this. Whoever wants to read, just get after it.
Why?
Loud, Gene said. You need my mic?
Okay, y'all ready?
Yeah.
Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying.
You know what the anointed, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you know what the Hebrew word is there for anointed? Mashiach, the Messiah.
Okay. Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion.
Yes.
Go
So this is what's going to, yeah, go ahead. Go all the way. Is that through 6?
That's through.
Okay, yeah, go ahead and
Yeah.
stop there.
Okay.
So what's going on here? This is the end. This is the last days.
Mhm.
I want you to think about this. So God, who spoke everything into existence, has his creation, which, do y'all remember when I did that thing where I don't even know what I was teaching on it, maybe the nature of God or something, but I put it up there and it showed from one of the satellites. I forget what's the name of that satellite, but it backed off and it showed, and the Earth kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and we could see a large portion of the universe. We still don't know how big the universe is. And that little bitty blurry spot that you couldn't hardly see was Earth. Okay, I want you to imagine God who spoke all that into existence, and people so deceived and so arrogant on this little bitty blurry dot in the middle of the universe that he sustains, by the way. He keeps going, believing that now they're strong enough to put him down and to not allow his son to rule. That's where we're at. That's how deceived the human heart is, to believe that. And they're going to try it. They're going to attempt it. We'll see how it goes. We know how it goes, right? We've read the end of the story. All right. So the hill, what we call Armageddon, Arm means like hill. And so the hill of Megiddo is, it's a little hill there, but it's toward the end of this huge valley called the Plain of Esdraelon, or the Valley of Jezreel. And I think I have some maps. Yeah. So this is a map of Israel. And you see right here, let me make sure that I'm looking at this correctly. See the Valley of Jezreel? So you have Haifa there. And this area is a port. So if if the navies are involved, they'll bring all the troops in. That port And this is a huge valley all in here. And I wished I was better in history, but I believe there have been major Roman campaigns there. I believe Napoleon actually had a major battle there. But it's such a good place to fight, this big, huge valley. And so really, and what we find here as we put all this together is this is really not the place where the battle will occur. It is a staging area for the forces of the Antichrist. They will stage up there and prepare to move on the Jews for a final solution. People have been trying that for a long time, haven't they? Haman tried it, Herod tried it, all these people have tried. Hitler tried it, the final solution. We're going to finally get rid of all the Jews, and that way the Messiah can't rule like he's prophesied to rule. Well, it never works out for him. I think this is a satellite view of it. So again, you have that port area, and Haifa is right there, and then you have this huge area right here where they'll stage up. So that is, and there's a little hill there called Megiddo, and that's where this name comes from, Har Megiddo. All right, so stage 2 is this. Babylon has become the capital of commerce and religion as the Antichrist is worshipped and commerce flourishes in the city. So what happened at the midpoint is there was a couple of things happened. One, he became worshipped. He deified himself. Remember, the false prophet is promoting the worship of him and Satan, basically, because Satan's the one that gives him his authority and power. Remember, Revelation 13, and so we have that going, and then we have the mark of the beast and the control of all commerce and trade. And I think we talked about one time in here how that would be easy if we went to all cryptocurrency, which is almost certainly where we're going to be.
Sure.
I believe in if 10 years down the road, the majority of what's going on is not cryptocurrency, I'm going to be surprised. And again, I'm usually late about everything. It's probably much less than that. So you will have a situation where everybody worships him, because what happened at the midpoint? Well, he died and came back to life. I mean, who in the world could take out the beast if he can die and come back to life? And so he's got religious allegiance, and even in the United States, you know what most people look for? Ever since I was a kid, in a president, somebody that will make us economically prosperous. He could be a total pagan, I think. And the people of the United States would say, as long as the gas was low, for my car, and my bills were low, and I had a good paying job, I'll vote for the guy, right? I mean, we've been there for a long time. Well, this guy's going to make everything prosperous. We're going to see that in Revelation 17 and 18, especially 18. Revelation 18, the world is going to be prosperous. All right. So Revelation 18 tells of the destruction of Babylon, and we'll get to that after we go through this series. And the destruction is by an alliance of forces from the north of Babylon. And that's not in your notes yet, who that might be, but I've got some other notes I'm going to print out for y'all for that. All right. So what happens in the second movement is you have this world religion set up, you have a control of everything. Babylon is the center of economic activity, and a group of nations move on Babylon and destroy it. Now remember, at this point, the Antichrist has set up to destroy Israel. He's brought all those armies into the valley of Jezreel. And then he hears that his capital, Babylon, is destroyed, is wiped out. Now time's starting to get short here. Again, we don't have an exact time on everything, but it's starting to get short. So Babylon is no more. Finally, Isaiah 13, Jeremiah 50, all these prophecies about Babylon being destroyed and nobody ever living there again. Finally, that actually happens this time. And so destruction is complete. The king of Babylon will not be in the city when it is destroyed. We see all of this. There's these passages in the Old Testament that tell us all of this. That he's not going to be there. And again, I want to encourage you to read all of those passages. They're all in your notes, and I'll make you a copy of all of this. And the Jews will be previously warned and will flee from the city. So over and over and over, we're going to see when we get to Revelation 18, before that total destruction of Babylon takes place. Of course, if that's the center of commerce, who do you think's not? You think the Jews are not going to be there? They're going to be Jewish businessmen there making money hand over foot. But there is communication to the Jewish people. I don't know if that's supernatural. It certainly could be. To get out. God extends mercy. Get out of there. It's about to be destroyed. And the Jews will be previously warned and will flee the city. You can read that in Revelation 18:4. All right, so ancient Babylon, the place where ancient Babylon was, is in the country of Iraq, right? We probably all know that because of the Gulf Wars. I learned so much about that area during the Gulf Wars, that I didn't know. In fact, you have the Medes of the Old Testament are the Kurds that are always persecuted, unfortunately, by Iran and Iraq. You have Iran are the Persians. In fact, I'm trying to remember when they changed the name. It was last century. It may have been after World War II. I don't remember exactly. But it used to be called Persia still in the 20th century. And at some point, I can't remember.
Maybe after World War
The
I.
Shah of Persia.
No, he was the Shah of Iran.
Shah of Iran, yeah.
I think it was after World War I.
It could have been. You historians looked that up. I knew it at one time, but I don't remember. But those are the Persians. The Medes are the Kurds. These Medes and Persians. The Babylonians are the Iraqis.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of those countries, like Iran, they have a lot of Arabians there now because of the Islam grew and they took over countries. The Persians were a highly developed culture, as we see in the Bible, and that went backwards. Anywhere where Islam gets a foothold, culturally, technologically, all of that, they go backwards, which has kind of worked for us because that's why Iran couldn't develop their own bombs and stuff. They weren't smart enough. They had to get other people come in. What were you going to say?
Where is the United Emirates? This.
United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
It's further. It's down below. What's the country that got invaded in the first Gulf War?
Kuwait.
Kuwait. It's down below Kuwait. United Arab Emirates. It's a very tiny,
Yeah, but they're
Place.
they kind of stand alone, don't they, as far as politically?
they may, I don't
Yeah.
know. They're extremely rich.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Iraq, and so this is, you know, I remember thinking, I got cut off, David. It is on. You may have to change it. For some reason, it's not. Okay. So Babylon gets wiped out. At the same time, national Israel apparently begins to turn back to Yahweh. You know, it has to have an impact on the Jews when they're warned to get out of Babylon and Babylon's wiped off the map. That would get you start to think, maybe God's still around. Maybe He still cares for us. And they start to turn back toward them. All right. Okay, stage 3. We're out of time. In fact, we're 10 minutes over. So we'll start at stage 3 next time. Very interesting, the fall of Jerusalem and how that fits in to all of this. Very interesting. Okay. Frank, why don't you close us in a word of prayer, please, sir?
Okay, so.